The night Olivia Hartwell walked into the Blackwood penthouse, she was wearing her only good dress, a deep navy wrap dress that her best friend Priya had ironed twice that afternoon. She had told herself the entire elevator ride up that this dinner was just business. Her father needed this connection. She just had to be polite, eat the food, shake some hands, and come home. Simple, clean, done. She had not planned for any of what happened next. The penthouse sat on the 42nd floor of Blackwood Tower in downtown Chicago. And the moment the elevator doors opened, Olivia understood that she had stepped into a different world entirely. The ceilings were impossibly high. The walls were glass on three sides, giving the whole room a feeling of floating above the city. Warm gold light fell across marble floors and expensive furniture. And somewhere in the background, soft jazz played like the building itself was sighing. Raymond Hartwell placed his hand briefly on his daughter's shoulder as they stepped inside. He was nervous. She could tell by the way he kept adjusting his cufflinks. His company had been bleeding money for 2 years, and Gerald Blackwood had offered a lifeline in the form of a business merger, but with one very old-fashioned condition attached. Raymond had explained it to Olivia 3 days ago, carefully, gently, the way a man explains something he knows is unfair, but believes is necessary. The Blackwood family had a son who needed a wife. Tyler, the younger one, 27, responsible, well-liked. Gerald wanted the merger sealed with something more than a contract. He wanted family. Olivia had asked her father if this was actually happening in the current century. Raymond had looked at the floor. She had agreed because she loved her father and because she was practical enough to understand that sometimes life did not offer you beautiful choices, only real ones. A woman in a black blazer greeted them at the entrance and guided them toward the main dining area, where Gerald Blackwood already stood. A tall man with silver hair and the posture of someone who had never been told no in his life. Behind him stood a young man with sandy hair and an easy smile. Tyler. He extended his hand immediately, warm and natural, the kind of person who made strangers feel comfortable within seconds. Olivia shook his hand. She smiled back. He was genuinely nice. She could see that immediately, and it made everything more complicated, not less. Then she looked to the left. He was standing slightly apart from the group near the window, a glass of water in his hand, looking out at the city below. He was taller than Tyler by a couple of inches, broader in the shoulder, dressed in a dark charcoal suit that seemed designed specifically to make him look like he belonged nowhere other than exactly where he was standing. His jaw was sharp, his expression completely unreadable. And when he turned slightly and his gaze landed on Olivia, she felt something happen in her chest that she had absolutely no language for. It was not attraction exactly, not the shallow kind. It was something more disorienting, like recognition, like looking at someone you have never met and somehow knowing they are going to matter. Gerald introduced him. Ethan Blackwood, CEO of Blackwood Energy, the eldest son. Ethan nodded once in Olivia's direction, his eyes moving over her face with the kind of calm, measured attention that made her feel simultaneously seen and examined. Then he looked away, back toward the window, as though she were simply another detail in the room he had already cataloged and moved on from. Dinner was served at a long table, and Olivia sat between Tyler and her father. The conversation was easy on that end of the table. Tyler asked about her studies, her part-time work, her opinions on things. He was genuinely curious, and it should have made her feel warm toward him. It did in a friendly way, but her attention kept drifting. Ethan sat at the other end of the table next to Gerald. He spoke rarely, but when he did, the conversation shifted toward him the way a room shifts when the temperature drops suddenly. Everyone paid attention. Even Gerald, who was clearly the dominant force in that family, listened when Ethan spoke. Ethan had the kind of authority that was not performed or announced. It simply existed. At one point during the meal, Ethan reached for the wine, and Olivia was already looking in that direction. Their eyes met across the table for a moment that lasted 3 seconds at most. He did not look away immediately. Neither did she. Then Tyler said something beside her, and she turned. And when she looked back, Ethan was already talking to Cole Merritt on his right, completely unbothered. After dinner, Raymond and Gerald disappeared into Gerald's private study to finalize the early framework of their agreement. Tyler offered to show Olivia the terrace, and she accepted, grateful for the air. The city spread out below them in glittering silence, and Tyler leaned on the railing and told her, honestly, that he knew this was a strange situation and that he had no interest in making her feel trapped. He said he just wanted them to at least be friends first and see where things went naturally. She liked him for saying that, she really did. But as they stood there talking, she heard the glass door behind them open and Ethan stepped out briefly, a phone pressed to his ear, speaking in a low, controlled voice about some overseas contract. He glanced at them once without expression and walked to the far end of the terrace, turning his back to give them privacy. Olivia watched him for just a moment before looking back at Tyler. She already knew something was wrong with her. The drive home was quiet. Raymond talked about Gerald's warmth and the promising future of the merger. He talked about Tyler's good character and stable life. He said Olivia had made a wonderful impression and that Gerald had seemed pleased. Olivia looked out the window at the passing city lights and thought about dark charcoal suits and unreadable eyes in the specific feeling of a gaze that weighs something. She thought about how Ethan Blackwood had not smiled once the entire evening and how somehow that made him more interesting to her than every person in that room who had. She pressed her forehead to the cool glass of the car window and told herself quietly and firmly that she was promised to Tyler. Tyler, who was keen and honest and had done nothing wrong. Tyler, who deserved someone who looked at him the way Olivia had been trying very hard not to look at his older brother all night. She closed her eyes. She was in serious trouble, and the dinner had not even been over 2 hours. Nobody told Olivia that moving into Blackwood Estate was part of the arrangement until her father sat her down on a Tuesday morning with his hands folded on the kitchen table and his eyes carrying the particular guilt of a man who had agreed to something without fully thinking it through. Gerald Blackwood, he explained carefully, believed in the old tradition of families getting to know each other before a wedding. He had proposed that Olivia spend the months leading up to the ceremony living at the estate so that she could settle into the family naturally. Raymond had said yes before consulting her. He admitted this with a long exhale and an apology that was genuine, even if it arrived too late to change anything. Olivia packed 2 suitcases and told Priya over the phone that evening. Priya said several things that were colorful and unhelpful, and then asked if the older brother was as handsome in person as he sounded in the description. Olivia hung up. Blackwood Estate was 40 minutes outside the city, a sprawling property behind iron gates with a long private driveway lined with oak trees that were already turning amber and gold for the season. The house itself was enormous but not cold the way she expected. It had warmth built into it, the kind that came from decades of actual living rather than interior decorating. There were photographs on walls, worn edges on the furniture in the sitting rooms, a kitchen that smelled permanently of coffee and something baked. Gerald welcomed her with genuine warmth. Tyler carried her bags upstairs himself and showed her the guest wing with cheerful commentary about the squeaky third stair and the hot water situation in the east bathroom. He was easy to be around. She appreciated that more with each passing day. Ethan was not home when she arrived. He did not come home until after 10 o'clock that first night. She heard his car on the gravel drive from her window, heard the front door, heard footsteps that were nothing like Tyler's light and casual stride. These were measured, deliberate, the walk of someone who moved through every space like they owned it, which in this case was literally true. She did not go downstairs. The next morning, she came down early before anyone else, she thought, and found Ethan already at the kitchen island with a mug of black coffee and his laptop open, still dressed from what looked like an early morning run, a gray fitted shirt and dark shorts. He looked up when she walked in. For a moment, neither of them said anything. "Good morning," she said. He nodded. "Coffee is fresh," he said, and looked back at his screen. That was the longest conversation they had for the first 4 days. He was not rude. That was the thing that made it harder somehow. Rudeness would have been easier to dismiss, easier to build a wall against. Instead, Ethan was simply professional. Distant in the way that a very capable doctor is distant with a patient. Polite, efficient, not unkind, but not present either. He said good morning and good night. He passed things at dinner without being asked. He held doors. He answered direct questions with direct answers. But he never initiated, never lingered, never looked at her for more than a second before looking somewhere else. Olivia told herself this was fine. She told herself it was actually better this way. She was not convincing herself. The estate had a routine that she fell into gradually. Gerald breakfasted early and spent his mornings in his study going over old files and correspondence with the focused energy of a man who refused to admit he had retired. Tyler was usually up by 8, relaxed and cheerful, and they began taking morning walks together around the property most days, talking about everything and nothing. He told her about the vineyard, about a trip he had taken through France 2 years ago, about the time he accidentally drove a tractor into a fence at age 14, and Gerald not spoken to him for an entire weekend. She laughed genuinely at his stories. She genuinely enjoyed his company, and she felt genuinely terrible about all of it, because Ethan would come downstairs after his run each morning, and she would hear him before she saw him, and something in her body would tighten with attention before she could stop it. She would hear the particular weight of his footsteps on the stairs, or his voice on a phone call in the hallway, and she would have to concentrate harder on whatever Tyler was saying to her. It was involuntary and she hated it. 3 weeks into her stay, something shifted. It was a Thursday evening and Gerald had gone to bed early with a headache, and Tyler had driven into the city to meet a friend, leaving Olivia alone in the large sitting room with a book she had been attempting to read for 2 weeks. She heard Ethan come in around 8 o'clock, heard the usual sounds of him moving through the house, and then the sitting room door opened and he walked in, presumably not expecting anyone to be there. He stopped briefly when he saw her. She looked up from her book. He said nothing for a moment, then walked to the small bar cart near the bookshelf and poured himself a short glass of something amber. He did not leave immediately, which was new. He stood there for a moment with his back to her, and she watched him. The line of his shoulders, the way he held the glass. "Is it always this quiet here in the evenings?" she asked, because the silence had weighed and she needed to do something about it. He turned slightly. "Usually," he said. "You prefer it," she said. It was not quite a question. He looked at her then, a real look, longer than his usual ones. "Yes," he said. Then after a pause, he added, "Does it bother you?" She shook her head. "I grew up quiet. My mother left when I was 9, and my father worked nights for most of my childhood. I know how to be in a room alone." She did not know why she told him that, so it came out naturally the way things do when the hour is late and the house is still. Ethan was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "That shapes a person." "It does," she agreed. He looked at her for another moment, something moving behind those gray eyes that she could not name. And then he took his glass and left the room. But before he reached the door, he paused with his back to her and said, "The library at the end of the East Hall is better for reading, quieter, better light." Then he was gone. She sat with that for a long time. After that, the dynamic changed in ways that were subtle enough that she could almost pretend they were not happening. Ethan began arriving at breakfast before his run, some mornings rather than after. He began answering her questions with more than 2 sentences. One evening, he corrected something she said about a business news story she had read wrong, and they ended up in a 10-minute conversation about energy markets that left her feeling more mentally alive than she had in weeks. Tyler noticed none of it because Tyler noticed the best in everything and assumed the same of everyone around him. Cole Merritt came to the estate one weekend for a working Saturday and spent the afternoon in Gerald's study with Ethan going over quarterly reports. At lunch, Olivia sat across from Cole. He spent most of the meal watching her with the quiet attentiveness of someone doing arithmetic in his head. When Ethan stepped out briefly to take a call, Cole leaned forward slightly and said, "He does not let people in easily. In case you were wondering why he runs so hot and cold." Olivia said she had not been wondering anything of the sort. Cole smiled and said nothing else. The night that cracked something open between them happened 4 weeks later on a rainy Friday. The power went out across the whole estate around 9 o'clock in the evening, a storm pulling down a line somewhere on the property. Tyler was still in the city, stuck because of the weather. Gerald had gone to bed. The estate was dark except for the candles that the housekeeper had set out before leaving. Olivia found her way to the kitchen by phone flashlight, looking for something to eat, and found Ethan already there, standing at the counter with a candle lit beside him, eating leftover pasta directly from the container with a fork. She stopped in the doorway. He looked up. The candle light did something unreasonable to his face, and she looked away immediately toward the refrigerator. She made herself a bowl of cereal because it was the simplest thing available. She sat at the kitchen island. He stayed where he was. The rain was loud against the windows, and the house felt smaller in the dark. He asked her what she was studying. She told him about her business degree, about the thesis she was working on, about sustainable investment models. He asked a question about her methodology that was genuinely intelligent, and she answered it, and then asked one back, and they were talking, really talking, in the dark kitchen, with the rain coming down outside for almost an hour. At some point, she said something that made him laugh. It was a quiet laugh, brief, controlled, but completely real, and the sound of it went directly through her like something irreversible. She looked at him in the candlelight. He was already looking at her. Neither of them moved for a moment that stretched long enough to mean something. Then Ethan set down his fork, looked at the counter, and said quietly that he thought the generator would kick in soon. He said goodnight in that even, controlled voice and left the kitchen. Olivia sat alone in the dark with her cereal going soft, her heart doing something complicated and painful, knowing with absolute certainty she was falling in love with the wrong man and that the wrong man already knew it too. The morning Tyler told her everything. The sky outside was the pale gray of early winter, and frost had crept up the edges of the estate windows overnight. Olivia was in the library at the end of the East Hall, the one Ethan had told her about weeks ago, sitting with her thesis notes spread across the reading table. When Tyler knocked on the open door and came in with an expression she had never seen on his face before, he looked like a man carrying something so heavy that his whole body had changed shape under the weight of it. She closed her notebook. He sat down across from her and spent a long moment looking at his hands. Then he looked up and said her name the way people say names when what follows is going to require forgiveness. "There is someone," so he said. "There has been someone for almost a year. Her name is Francesca, and she works at the vineyard, and I have been trying to end it, trying to do the right thing by this arrangement, and by you, and by my father. But I cannot do it anymore. I cannot marry you when I am in love with someone else. You deserve better than that. You deserve someone who chooses you completely." Olivia looked at him for a long moment. Then she exhaled slowly and said, "Tyler, I am so relieved. I do not know where to begin." He blinked. He had clearly prepared himself for tears or anger, or both. The relief on his face when he understood she meant it was almost funny. They sat there for a moment, and then both of them laughed, the slightly nervous laughter of two people releasing a pressure that had been building for months. He reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "I am sorry," he said genuinely. "I should have told my father sooner. I should have been honest from the beginning instead of hoping I could make myself feel something different." She squeezed his hand back. "Go tell Gerald," she said, "and then go call Francesca." He nodded, stood up, and then paused at the door. "For what it is worth," he said quietly, "I think you are going to be just fine." She smiled at him and said nothing. Gerald did not take it quietly. She heard him from 2 floors up. Not the words exactly, but the volume and the tone. The kind of controlled fury that powerful men use when they have decided something and the world has disagreed with them. She heard Tyler's voice, steady and respectful, but firm in a way she had not heard from him before. She heard a third voice come in after several minutes, lower than both, and she knew immediately whose it was. Ethan. She could not hear what he said, but she heard the atmosphere in the room below changed. Gerald's voice lowered. Tyler's breathing space came back. Ethan had that effect on rooms. He did not raise his voice. He simply made the temperature drop until everyone else adjusted. She stayed in the library. An hour passed. Then the house went very quiet. Then footsteps came up the stairs, past the 2nd floor, and continued to the East Hall. She already knew. The library door was open, and Ethan filled the frame of it, still in his work clothes from an early meeting. Jacket gone, the top button of his dark shirt open. He looked at her across the room, and she looked back at him, and the distance between them felt like something that had already been decided. "My father wants to speak with you," he said. She nodded and stood up. She gathered her notes slowly, not out of stalling, but because her hands needed something to do. "Olivia," Ethan said. She looked up. He was quiet for a moment. His jaw was tight, the way it always was when he was thinking through something carefully. Then he said, "Whatever happens in that conversation, whatever my father proposes, you are not obligated. You understand that you owe this family nothing." She looked at him. She said, "What if I want to owe this family something?" He said nothing. His eyes stayed on her face with that particular focused stillness that she had come to understand was not coldness at all. It was the opposite of coldness. It was the way Ethan Blackwood looked at things that mattered to him when he did not yet trust himself to speak. She walked past him into the hallway. Gerald was in his study, standing by the window with his hands behind his back, the way he stood when he was composing himself. He turned when she entered, and she saw in his face something she had not expected. Not just the controlled frustration of a patriarch whose plans had come undone, but something older and more tired underneath it. Regret, maybe, or the particular exhaustion of a man who had been using tradition as a substitute for conversation for too many years. He gestured to the chair across from his desk, and she sat. He remained standing. "Merger still matters," he began. "The partnership between our families still has value. Tyler has made his position clear, and I have accepted it, though not without difficulty." He paused. "But I am not prepared to let the arrangement dissolve entirely. Not when I believe it still serves everyone well." He looked at her directly. "There is another son," he said. Olivia kept her face still. "I would not ask this of either of you without consent," Gerald continued, and she heard in his voice that this was genuine, that Tyler's honesty had done something to shift his father's approach. "I am asking, not requiring. Ethan is 33 years old and has given everything to this company and to this family and has given nothing to himself." He said this last part with something in his voice that sounded close to grief. "I have watched him close himself off for 10 years, and I do not know how to reach him. But I have watched him these past weeks, and I see something different. When you are in the room." She did not speak. Gerald looked out the window. "Talk to him," he said quietly. "That is all I ask. Just talk to him. The rest is between you and him and nobody else." She found Ethan in the garden. He was standing on the stone path near the old iron bench by the far hedge, his back to the house, looking out at the frost-covered grass. He heard her footsteps on the path and did not turn immediately, but she saw his shoulders shift slightly, that small, involuntary adjustment she had learned to read. She stopped a few feet behind him. "Your father is surprisingly reasonable when Tyler backs him into a corner," she said. Ethan turned then. He looked at her with that careful, measuring look. "What did he say to you?" She took a breath. "He asked me to talk to you." Ethan was quiet. She stepped closer. The cold air made her breath visible, and she watched it disappear between them. "Ethan," she said, "I need to tell you something, and I need you to actually hear it and not file it away and process it alone for 3 weeks before deciding how to respond." Something shifted in his face. The corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile, but the architecture of one. She said, "I have been in love with you since the night I walked into that penthouse, and you were standing at the window looking at the city like it owed you something. I know that was the night I was introduced to your brother. I know what this situation looks like, and I know it is complicated, and I know you're standing there right now building 17 different logical reasons why this is not a good idea." His jaw tightened, but she continued, "But I am done being quiet about it. I was going to marry Tyler and be a good partner to him and spend the rest of my life being quietly in love with you from across the room, and I was prepared to do that because I thought it was the only option. But it is not the only option anymore. So I am standing here and I am telling you the truth, and now it is your turn." The garden was completely still. The frost on the grass caught the thin winter light. Somewhere inside the house, a door opened and closed, and then there was silence again. Ethan looked at her for a long moment. She watched him process it, watched the careful, controlled exterior go through something that looked almost like pain before it opened into something else entirely. He said her name, just her name, Olivia, in a voice that was nothing like his boardroom voice, or his polite dinner voice, or his early morning coffee voice. It was a voice she had not heard from him before, lower and unguarded and slightly rough at the edges. "I have been trying," he said slowly, "to do the correct thing since the night you arrived. The correct thing being to treat you as Tyler's future wife and nothing beyond that." He looked down briefly, then back at her. "I have not been successful." She waited. He took one step toward her. "I notice everything about you," he said. "The way you argue with news articles quietly under your breath when you think no one can hear. The way you hold your coffee cup with both hands. The way you looked at me in that kitchen during the storm and then looked away like you were protecting yourself from something." Her heart was hammering. He took another step. "I do not know how to do this," he said. "I want to be honest with you about that. I have spent a long time not letting anything past a certain point, and I am not sure I know how to stop doing that. But I know that every morning I came down early to the kitchen was because of you. I know that I told you about the library because I wanted to give you something. I know that when Cole told me you had been asking Raymond about returning home early, I spent an entire afternoon unable to focus on a single document. He stopped directly in front of her, close enough that she had to look up slightly to meet his eyes. I am not good at this, he said quietly. I need you to know that going in. I am not Tyler. I am not easy or light or naturally warm. I will get this wrong sometimes. I will go quiet when I should speak, and I will retreat when I should stay, and I will need you to call me back when I do. She reached up and placed her hand against his jaw, her palm against the sharp line of it, and felt him go completely still under her touch. The way a person goes still when they are afraid that moving will end something they cannot afford to lose. I know who you are, she said softly. I fell in love with exactly who you are, not a version of you that is easier. This version, the one who gives directions to libraries and laughs once every 3 weeks and makes everyone in a room recalibrate when he speaks. His hand came up and covered hers where it rested against his face. He closed his eyes for just a moment. When he opened them, the gray in them was different. Warmer, like the color of the sky turns just before the light actually arrives. He said, I am sorry it took me so long. She shook her head. You are here now, she said. He kissed her then in the Colwyn garden with frost on the grass and winter light coming thin through the bare trees. And it was nothing like the formal, careful distance he had maintained for weeks. It was honest and unhurried and it tasted like everything he had been holding back, which turned out to be considerable. She felt his arms come around her properly for the first time and understood immediately why he had been so careful about never quite touching her before. There was nothing halfway about Ethan Blackwood once he decided something. When they finally stood up back from each other, she was warm despite the cold, and his expression had done something she had never seen from him before. He looked peaceful. Not relaxed exactly, that was perhaps too much to ask of a man built the way he was built, but peaceful like something long held tightly had finally been set down. They walked back to the house together. Gerald was in the hallway when they came through the door, and he looked at his eldest son's face and then at Olivia, and he said nothing at all for a long moment. Then he cleared his throat and said that dinner would be at 7 o'clock and walked back toward his study with the careful dignity of a man pretending he was not profoundly moved. Tyler was in the kitchen when they found him on the phone with Francesca. His whole face transformed in the way that people who are finally being honest about love are transformed. He saw them together and his smile went wide, and he pointed at Ethan with undisguised delight. Ethan gave him a look that would have frozen a lesser person. Tyler laughed anyway. That evening at dinner, the five of them sat together, Gerald at the head of the table, Tyler with his phone face down beside his plate, but smiling the whole meal. Cole, who had arrived mid-afternoon and said nothing about anything, while somehow managing to look entirely unsurprised. Ethan sat beside Olivia, and the difference from every other dinner was small in its details and enormous in its meaning. His knee was against hers under the table. He poured her wine without being asked. When she made a point about something Gerald had said, Ethan backed her up with a precision that made Gerald raise his eyebrows and look between them with an expression that was 9 parts satisfaction and 1 part amusement. Later that night, she stood at the window of the library, her library now, looking out at the dark garden below. She heard the door open and felt the familiar shift in the room's atmosphere before she heard a word. Ethan stood beside her at the window. They looked out at the garden where the frost had thickened over the evening. The iron bench silver white, the hedges still and dark. She leaned her head against his shoulder. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, I spent a long time believing that control was the same thing as strength. She waited. You changed that, he said simply. She smiled against his shoulder. Outside, the frost covered everything in the quiet, patient way that cold things do, not to damage but to preserve, holding the ground still until the right season arrived to make things grow. Inside the library, in the warm lamplight, Ethan Blackwood put his arm around Olivia Hartwell, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, he did not plan what came next. He simply stayed. And that, for a man like him, was everything. As this story comes to a close, it leaves behind something more than just entertainment. Stories like this often mirror the complicated emotions people face in real life. Love, pride, misunderstanding, ambition, and sometimes regret. When powerful personalities collide, even the smallest moment can lead to consequences no one expected. But now the story belongs to you as much as it belongs to the characters. What did you think about the choices they made? Do you believe the ending was fair? Or would you have handled the situation differently if you were in their place? Every viewer brings a different perspective, and your thoughts might reveal a side of the story others never considered. I would really like to hear your opinion, so take a moment and share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story kept you engaged or made you reflect on relationships and life decisions, please take a second to press the like button. It's a simple way to support the channel and helps this story reach more viewers who enjoy emotional storytelling. And if you are someone who enjoys powerful stories about billionaires, CEOs, and a complicated world of human emotions, make sure you subscribe. New stories are shared regularly here, each one designed to surprise you, move you, and sometimes even challenge the way you see certain situations. You can also help the channel grow by sharing this story with someone who enjoys dramatic storytelling. Thank you for watching and for being part of this storytelling journey. This story reminds us of one powerful truth. The heart rarely follows the paths others have drawn for us. Olivia was ready to sacrifice her feelings for duty and family, but when love arrived quietly, unexpected and undeniable, it refused to be silenced. Sometimes the greatest courage isn't saying yes to what's expected, but having the honesty to choose what truly matters, even when the world calls it impossible. Love doesn't always arrive on time or in the right form, but when it's real, it reshapes everything. Have you ever had to choose between duty and your heart? Share your story in the comments. I read every single one and love hearing how these moments changed your life. If this touched you, hit that like button and subscribe so you never miss another story that reminds us what it means to truly choose ourselves. See you in the next one.